Right.
All right, I have a thumbs up for us, so it is now 11 o'clock, and we'll call a meeting to order for our work session. This is a work session of some significance because it is dedicated solely to our wastewater treatment plant. This is a comprehensive evaluation that we, interestingly enough, authorized about a year ago. In fact, it was exactly a year ago. And so it has taken a while. They've obviously gathered lots of data, and so they're going to give us a good understanding of where we are and where we need to go. So, Edward?
Well, thank you, Mayor. This is something we have been, like you said, working on for the past year or so. I think we had our kickoff formally with Garver. We went through the process of selecting a consultant. And Garver was the one the board approved. We kicked it off in the summer, early summer of last year. And so from then until really today, we've pretty much nonstop. Garver, as you guys know, is also our consultant who has worked with us on our aerator evaluation. And they also are currently working on the design for our new aeration system. So they are very familiar with our plant, very familiar with the challenges that we have. And that's what kind of today is a little bit about, to kind of give the board a snapshot of where we are. And I think the next thing we really want to talk about, not today, but in the days ahead, is how do we actually implement these things? How do we pay for them? What is the sequence and the timeline of doing that? And then how do we fund it? And that even gets back to part of our conversation in the works in the special call meeting, and that we will be trying to pursue any and all types of funding sources available, either the matches, grant matches, low interest loans, which is be on the next board agenda for Tuesday night, pursuing of that. And then obviously the conversation too, probably sometime this summer or the fall. But today is really kind of a snapshot of where we are, kind of where we need to be from a community standpoint, both currently and then also projecting out 20 years. That was kind of the focus of this evaluation, because we certainly do not want wastewater to be a limiting growth inhibitor for our community. And so I'm pleased today to introduce to y'all Wes Starkville. I know Wes has ever presented before the board. Wes is the project lead for this, as well as the project lead for our aeration design. And then he's joined here by Mr. Matt Tabor, right over here. They both are in the wastewater division of Florida. We're really happy with the project we're working together. And I'm going to turn it over to Wes and let him go through it. But today is very much please stop along the way. We tried to distill this down into a very big document that you guys all have a copy of it, to something that is just the pertinent information, but also giving you some understanding of what a wastewater treatment process looks like, so you can kind of understand some of the challenges. So,
Well, Edward, before you, would you refresh everyone's memory about who your team team is here with us?
And I'm pleased to have several members of my team here. Mr. Thomas Ware. Mr. Thomas is our chief wastewater operator. He is the gentleman who keeps everything running on a day-to-day basis with staff, and some of the challenges that you'll hear about today. He does a magnificent job keeping us within our permanent compliance. And I just want to thank him. And of course, Mr. John Scott, our assistant general manager. John is an electric guy by trade, but he is learning more and more about water and wastewater as he's been in our multi-service utility, and I'm glad that he's here. Mary Williams is our capital project manager. Mary has been working on this project from the beginning, kind of helping draft all the RFP documents all the way through. Kind of, I call Mary the cat herder for this project, making sure we're staying on schedule and making sure everybody got comments in, and that we're progressing on the timeline that we all agreed to. And then Mary's obviously going to be instrumental to going forward of how we actually implement and build these projects and these recommendations. And then Bailey Wofford is our system engineer for water and wastewater. And so we got a great team, and great thankful for them and their work in this project. So thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
We'll turn it over to Wes.
All right. Thank you all, and good morning. First of all, thank you all for the opportunity to share. Always love talking wastewater, and getting to tell a little bit about it is always fascinating. When we do these comprehensive evaluations, they're always, this makes me very weird. I love it. It's just fun. Because every plant has a story to tell. Every utility has a story. Every piece of infrastructure has a story to tell. So we appreciate the opportunity to learn y'all's story, and more importantly, to share that story with y'all this morning. and what the plant holds as it sits today. So a little bit of background, just to kind of refresh everybody's memory on the facility. The Ernest E. Jones Wastewater Treatment Plant has reliably served the city of Starkville and surrounding areas for over 45 years. And just like any other wastewater treatment facility, it's a lot of times out of sight, out of mind type infrastructure that we don't think about. Usually when you go there, they're not the best smelling facilities. They're doing a very tough job though, if you think about it. Thomas and his staff has taken wastewater that comes to the plant that looks like that picture to the left, running it through his various treatment processes, working his magic to ultimately discharge into Hollis Creek on this clear effluent that you see on the right. It's a very vital part of the community, part of the infrastructure to ultimately turn that resource being clean water, back to the environment. So it's critical that these facilities work well, that they're reliable, that they can stand up when they're tested, when they're pushed to the limits, and that was really our charge to understand how that facility was equipped to do that. The wastewater treatment plant, it's a secondary treatment facility, and that's important as it relates to Mississippi Department of Environmental Quality. Ultimately, the plant has to meet permit requirements that are set forth by them. Most recently, the permit was issued in 2020, so coming on early next year, there will be a new permit that gets drafted and put out, and that will tell the story of the permit limits that the facility has to treat. Super important that we understand that and coordinate when we're doing these type of evaluations. It's important to understand the facility today and its capabilities to treat, but we don't want to be short-sighted and think what's coming down the road, right? We don't want to just stop short of equipping you today. It's always about that story tomorrow and the ability to do that tomorrow. So that was a key part of this evaluation. So an interesting thing, since commissioning, the facility, again, has met the needs of Starkville to support the growth. Wastewater treatment is a core piece of that growth model. And if you just look at the population of Starkville since the facility came online in 1980, just a little bit over 16,000 in over the 45 years. And these numbers are probably a little bit outdated, just shy of 25,000. That facility has been a backbone. It's supported that growth. It's gotten you to where you are today. And that's important, just like all of the pieces of our infrastructure are. As you know, if you don't have that piece of the puzzle, it's going to make life difficult. Since 2015, just to kind of paint a snapshot, the wastewater treatment plant has seen, on average, flows about 5 MGD. They spiked in 2019, 2020. That was a very wet part of the 5-year period that really pushed those numbers up. It certainly strains the facility. But you can kind of see a rolling average somewhere about 4.7, 4.8 MGD. And why that's important is the original design capacity of that plant, when it was put online in 1980, the target capacity was 5 MGD. That's what that facility was designed to treat for. Now we've learned a lot in wastewater since 1980 where we were able to push these facilities a little bit more than what they were designed to be. But certainly, as it relates to the facility as it stands today, the flows that it sees, it's at its limit. They're doing everything that they can to keep it going, to keep the facility in compliance. With anticipated growth, Starkville is going to continue to grow. That was a piece of this puzzle as well to understand. The plant's going to continue to be challenged to maintain permit compliance. Just some high-level projections that we did as a part of this effort. That roughly 4.5, 4.75 MGD that we've seen over the past 5 years, 20 years from now, we would expect that to be 6.5 to 7 MGD. And that's just simply the growth of Starkville and any other additional connections that the city and the utility takes on. So last year, in 2023, Starkville Utilities initiated a comprehensive evaluation of the facility. Evaluations can mean a lot of different things. Specifically for this facility, we were looking at capacity. We needed to understand what that number was, what this facility can treat. We needed to understand the condition of the assets there. Are the key pieces of the plant in good condition, or should we be aware of them retiring very soon? And then reliability. Reliability is a very important piece of anything to do with infrastructure, but certainly wastewater treatment. We need the facility to be reliable when it's pushed to its limits or when that piece of equipment does go down. How equipped does this facility respond and ultimately maintain compliance with the permit, which is the #1 charge, along with the safety of the personnel. I always like to kind of view this as a three-pronged stool because ultimately all of these contribute to plant performance and compliance. Without capacity, you're not going to comply. You're not going to achieve the performance that you need. If you have poor assets, poor condition that may break down a lot, that's going to certainly put performance and compliance at risk. And if you don't have that reliability, that's absolutely a contributor. So having all of these working together in concert to support the mission of that facility, which is ultimately permit compliance and the safety of the staff, is critical. And that's the lens that we were trying to look at this facility through over the past 100 months. So a few things that we want to check off the list today during our discussion. Give you a background of the facility. We want to talk about the results. I think that's the most interest for everybody in the room. What's the condition assessment results and what's the capacity assessment results? So they're two different things that we'll talk about. Some recommended improvements to address the findings that we found in that assessment. And then some conclusions, some path forward thoughts, and then certainly hopefully a lot of conversation, discussion. As we go through this, please feel free to stop me. Be glad to go into any of the details as it relates to the evaluation that may or may not be here. So please feel free to do that. So I mentioned before the facility came online in 1979, 1980. And by and large, it's relatively untouched. In 1998, there was an additional clarifier that was constructed that did not increase capacity, but that was another tool that Thomas and his team have to help with treatment, to help with performance, certainly a reliability piece. 2002, the original brush rotors were rehabbed, so a rehabilitation project. And then probably most of us are familiar in 2019, the solids improvements project was completed, as well as some upgrades to those brush rotors that are a key focus today. So when we're talking about wastewater treatment, I always try to start from here, and that's not to go into the minutia of all of the processes, but I want you to understand, and my hope is that you understand that wastewater treatment is a series of steps. We're slowly chipping away at the mountain, so to speak, to achieve that permit compliance. So it's steps operate effectively to meet those permit limits. So if step A is not operating well, or it's sacrificing its ability to treat, steps B, C, D, and E are going to suffer, right? So the further upstream you go in a facility, the poorer that performance is, it's going to snowball as it works its way through. So we got to understand that when we talk about each of the various steps, each of the various processes, because they're all designed and aimed to do one specific thing that ultimately contributes to that permit compliance. So just to walk you through kind of the flow path here at the plant, there's an influent pump station that's to the northeast here. If you're familiar with this area, there's a very large EQ pond up there. All of the wastewater in Starkville goes to a pump station that's right there. That pump station pumps it into our very first treatment step. You see in the red box, that's our headworks facility. We're trying to remove any debris, any trash, any rags, any small grit particles that may affect equipment downstream. That's what we're trying to achieve in that process. From there, it goes to our oxidation ditches. Wastewater treatment is a biological process. We rely on biology. It's really cool if you get down into the weeds of it to see just what these microorganisms are doing and how it ultimately leads to compliance and treatment. It's not magic, but it kind of looks that way when you see those things under a microscope. That's an active biological environment in our oxidation ditches that's contributing to treatment. A lot of the organics and the ammonia that we're trying to remove. From there, we go to our secondary clarifiers, and ultimately we're trying to settle out all of those bugs in the bottom and create a clear layer on top, and that clear layer is what flows downstream, and we'll talk about the bugs here in just a second. From that, we still have to disinfect it. Secondary treatment standards, when the Clean Water Act came along, one of the key initiatives there was disinfection, and that's removing pathogens, those disease-causing organisms that our biological systems kind of treat, but they don't get it down to the levels that protect public health. So here at this facility, chlorine gas is used to inactivate, to oxidize any of those pathogens. And then we re-aerate it, we add oxygen back to the water so that the fish are happy downstream. We discharge it ultimately into Hollis Creek, which is just to the immediate right on this aerial photograph. I mentioned the bugs. We do produce biology as a part of this process, and because we're producing biology, at times we get more than we need. So we have to waste solids as a part of this. So from our secondary clarifiers, we have a sludge holding tank, which is one of the new facilities that y'all have there. We dewater those solids so that we can ultimately dispose of that. And then at this facility, y'all have solar drying to achieve a certain quality biosolid that enables y'all to have more disposal options. It's a very nice thing to have. But ultimately, that is how we get the solids out of the facility. So a lot of different pieces of the puzzle, right, coming together, but each very important to that mission that we talked about. just to kind of tie the dates that I mentioned before to the facilities at the plant, everything that you see in green was circa 1979 when construction was completed. So those are still online today and working hard to meet the treatment goals of the facility. In 1998, clarifier number 3, which is highlighted in yellow, was constructed. 2002, we did address some of the equipment in the ditches. You can see that highlighted in red. And then certainly 2019, everything in the upper right we addressed, as well as going back and revisiting the condition and replacing the rotors in the ditches as a part of that effort. But if we put everything together, you can kind of get a feel for a lot of the major components. The major pieces of the puzzle are in green in this image, which means they're that 45-year-old asset and working well, working reliable as it's contributing to treatment. But these things have a finite life that we'll talk about. It's important to understand that so you're not caught off guard or you're not surprised should it go down. So as a part of this evaluation, we assess the major equipment for each unit process, each of those steps along the way, really from 2 different angles. The first is to understand the condition of it, what's the state of this pump or what's the state of this basin, and then to understand the capacity. And I want to break both of these down a little bit further as we go through these next few slides, but we'll start with this piece. Before I do that though, we did exclude the solids facilities from the evaluation effort. Again, those are most recently placed online in 2019. Those facilities are working well for Thomas and his staff. And so in order just to really pinpoint and get a laser focus on the facilities that needed it, those were excluded from the effort. But that doesn't diminish their importance to what this facility does. It's an extremely important piece just on the part of the evaluation assessment that we did. So condition, when we look at wastewater treatment facilities and just treatment facilities in large, we really want to understand the condition of an asset from 3 different angles. One, the structural elements of it. What does the concrete look like? How are the handrails, the condition of those so that our workers and our staff have a safe environment to work in? Any protected coating systems, the walkways, anything that you think is structural, we look at it from a structural perspective. And those are important to understand as a part of a facility. Process mechanical, this is the pumps, this is the valves, this is the pipes, this is the working equipment, understanding the condition of those assets as it relates to their condition. And then lastly, we can't forget electrical. Electrical is really the bones behind the scenes that's powering these facilities. And really we talk about reliability and worker safety. This is a very important aspect that we have to consider because this is dangerous stuff. It's not just that little socket in the wall that you may get a little shock from. This is serious power that can cause death if these aren't in good shape. So we have to understand that as well. When we do these though, I kind of always try to set the stage. I try to have conversations with each of the various utilities that we do this at because understand that condition assessments, just by their very nature, are subjective, right? You're asking somebody to come in to look at a piece of equipment and to tell you how well it is or how poor it is. That's extremely subjective. I don't want to dismiss that, or I'm not cognizant of that. And they're sometimes difficult to translate into actionable plans. And there's reasons for that because we all have a bias when we're looking at pieces of equipment. So I always try to, when I visit with my team, when I visit with utilities, just to kind of set the stage on 4 kind of principles that I have that we have to keep in mind. Just because it's old doesn't mean it's bad. Doesn't mean it's bad at all. But just because it's new doesn't mean it's good either, right? We have to look at each piece as it stands today, but understand that if that pump is 30 years old, it's been working pretty well, right? Doesn't mean it's going to crap out tomorrow. It shouldn't catch us off guard though, so we may need some spare parts on site, but let it run. It's serving well. On the flip side, that new pump, they could have, flipped the switch yesterday on it and it didn't run at all, but it sure looks bright and shiny. Right, we have to avoid that when we're asking questions, when we're working with staff to understand that. Priority improvements don't always mean large expenses or efforts. A lot of times you'll find through these efforts that sort of low-hanging fruit, right? There may be that one valve that if it failed, the condition or the plant would just crumble to pieces. We would lose compliance with our permit. It doesn't always mean a large investment or significant investment. And so take those goggles off and approach every facility with that in mind. But sometimes in time with that, something very small can cripple a large facility or process. It doesn't have to be a big basin that fails. It doesn't have to be a a humongous piece of equipment that puts that facility at risk. It could be the little things. I mentioned the valve before. It could be a small little pump that goes down, or a chemical feed tank. Those are equally important to that overall mission, and if it fails, everything else may suffer. And again, just because it's running today doesn't mean it was operable yesterday. We have to ask the questions. We have to work with the staff that have been here day in and day out to understand, and really sometimes pry that information out, right, to get them to remember where the skeletons are buried, so to speak, on the assets and the facilities at the plant. I try to avoid the term useful life, but it's inevitable in conversations. I always say the term useful life is not very useful, right? We need to understand, though, that the assets in the wastewater treatment plant do have a finite life. A lot of times when we're doing business case evaluations to justify a project, if it makes sense or not, or to replace equipment, we do have to kind of tie expected service life to it, so that we understand how frequently we may have to replace or to maintain. But that doesn't mean at year 50 and day one that your tank is going to crumble and fall apart. It's absolutely not true. There are plenty of facilities that operate with 50-year-old concrete tanks, and they're going to continue operating well. But we do need to understand things like pumps, things like valves, just general process equipment, electrical infrastructure. They have that finite period. It may be less than 20 years, maybe less than 15 years. You may get a little bit more out of it. But as you approach these dates and understand the age of these facilities, I always try to communicate that, what does your spare parts inventory look like? Do you have the tools in hand or on site, or can you get to them very quickly should that pump go down, when it does? Because it's going to. I just can't tell you when. But you can be equipped to tackle it when it does, so that your facility disruption is minimized as best as it possibly can. So when we were assessing this, we did use a tool. The Water Environment Research Federation is an industry kind of standard in a lot of aspects as it relates to wastewater. But asset management and condition assessments are a very important component of their research and what they try to do. They actually provide what they call a simple tool, and it's an acronym. I would stumble over myself if I tried to tell you what it meant. It's just simple to use. That's kind of where they get to. It's actually an Excel spreadsheet that's free. You can apply this not just to a wastewater treatment plant, you can apply it to any asset that you have throughout your utility, throughout your city. Because ultimately what it's trying to do is tell us two variables, two very important variables. The likelihood of failure, and think of this in terms of, when I say asset, think of a pump, think of a valve, think of a specific component to the plant, not just the plant in general, but we're dialing it down to pretty granular level here. How vulnerable or how likely is that asset to fail? We need to understand that. But if it does fail, what does that mean for the facility? How serious will that be? If it goes down and it's a minimal disruption, it's not as big of a risk as that small valve that may lead to catastrophe at the plant. Right? So we're trying to tie those two pieces together and ultimately produce some useful data. That the goal here is to try to take out that bias, to try to take out that subjectivity, and give you a formal ranking system, a scoring system that's transparent, that everybody can see. We're not trying to do this behind the curtain. We want everybody to see how we arrive at ultimate conclusions that we have. So each category, such as likelihood of failure, includes various criteria. These are criteria that are certainly facility specific, they're utility specific, but likelihood of failure, we're looking at condition, we're looking at capacity, we're looking at how reliable that process is, or that piece of equipment is, the availability of spare parts, the pieces that you may have to get on hand. Is this part no longer manufactured and obsolete, and you can't get any repair parts at all? Or is it something you can run down to Lowe's and get very quickly if it goes down? The availability of spare parts is what we're trying to understand there. And then the maintainability. Every staff has that one or two people that have been there for 30, 40, 50 years that knows how that facility runs. They know how to maintain that specific piece of equipment, but it's not because it's written down everywhere. It comes from years of knowledge, and it's up here. That person's going to retire one day, right? They're not there. So understanding that knowledge transfer as it comes to the maintainability of the utility of the facility is important. So we're trying to pry that information out, and all of that rolls up into the likelihood of failure. Consequence of failure is extremely important as well. The social or the community aspect, simply put, this is the safety of our workers and the surrounding community. That's extremely important. You can see why it has one of the highest weighted values there at 35%. The economic or the financial impact, if that process or if that asset goes down, how big of a dent is that going to be in the operating budget, equipped to handle that? And then the environmental side, if this goes down, is it going to contribute to the permit device, or is it just kind of a headache for a day or two that we just have to work through? So a lot of different variables there. This is a big table. I'm not even going to attempt to try to go through it. All that I wanted you to see and to take away here is each of those criteria are scored on a scale of 1 to 5. 1 being the best it could be, 5 being the worst it could be. And we try to define that for everybody that's doing the evaluation so that we're all kind of viewing it very similar. We're scoring, we're applying the criteria as consistent as possible, because what I may think is a 4, Matt may think is a 2, because we haven't set these definitions of what we're trying to look at. So this kind of applies consistency across the board, and just like we do it for likelihood of failure, we also do it for consequence of failure. Same concept there. So what do we do with that? Knowing these factors across the plan ultimately allow us to plan properly and to apply some decision-making guidelines as to how we decide. We've got this large plant here, we've got 50 different assets. Where do I start? What's the most important versus what's the least important that I have to worry about? So we're trying to tie these two variables together, and ultimately what you end up with is a chart that looks very similar, something like this. So we're applying numbers, right? So the higher the consequence of failure number goes, the further right on this scale we go, right? You can see the further right we go, we start needing to pay attention, right? It's either high priority or we just need to increase the condition monitoring to understand that. But we want to tie the likelihood of failure to that as well. Just because if this fails, our plant falls into the pit of the earth is bad, but if it's not likely to occur, it doesn't need to be on our radar as high. It's not a high priority to replace immediately. So we're trying to tie those numbers together, because ultimately what this graph, what this tool will tell us is our risk profile through the facility, right? Now, it's our job as administrators or as engineers or operators or maintenance technicians to balance that risk, right? Risk is a bad thing in a facility. Doesn't mean you can get rid of it. It's always going to be there, but we want to mitigate it as best as we can and have a plan to tackle that should something go bad. So without going through each of the assets and talking about what scored what and why, this is how the assessment at the facility shook out for the wastewater treatment plant. You can see we took it to about 25 different assets that were each scored across the plant. And you can kind of see, like I was talking about before, red means it's a critical risk. That means it's very likely to fail, and if it does fail, it means very bad things. That's what red is, and as simple as I can put it. As you go back, orange is a high risk, but not as serious or significant. Yellow is that medium risk. That means that you need to keep an eye on it, be aware of it, but it's not the end of the world if you have processes or assets in the yellow. And then green's good. Green's good in everything. Green's good in this as well. That means it's in good shape, good condition, it's reliable. It may have a high consequence of failure if it does go down, but the likelihood of that may be very low, very unlikely. So from that, the oxidation ditches, which I don't think should surprise much in this room if you know a lot of the history there, is extremely concerning. It's very critical. That's why you're doing the project that you're doing now, and investing in that piece of infrastructure at the plant. Just as important, though, is the site electrical. Most of that electrical infrastructure is 45 years old. There's been some repairs. There's been, I won't say improvements, but just over time, things deteriorate, particularly in electrical facilities. Wastewater treatment plants have a lot of places high hydrogen sulfide. There's corrosive conditions, and electrical stuff is very susceptible to that. So the poorer or the more that deteriorates, that's a very big safety risk for our staff. I mentioned before, we're talking about serious power at most of these processes. And then the chlorine and sulfur dioxide building. And that's not the building is bad. This is a very good example of sometimes it's a very small thing that has a very big impact at the plant. Right now the plant's not equipped with any kind of detection or alarm that tells staff that there's a chlorine leak. So should a cylinder be leaking, chlorine is very, very toxic, extremely toxic, very dangerous to our staff. Without an alarm to tell them that the cylinder is leaking, they could open that door and walk right in, and it could lead to a catastrophe, a very bad thing. So even though that's up here and it's up on the red, a simple alarm to alert staff that there's a leak would mitigate that. It would shuffle things down back to the left. And that's actually part of the project that we're focusing on right now is applying that low-hanging fruit that I've talked about before. If you want to see where that kind of shakes out, on a site plan that we talked about before, you can see the oxidation ditches are at the bottom of this image. The chlorine and the sulfur dioxide facility is right to the bottom part of our admin building, which is, again, concerning. If we don't know that there's a leak, there's a break room right here in that same building. Okay, it's very important that we know that. And then you can see a lot of the electrical infrastructure starts here, but it does exist throughout the plant. Any questions on the condition piece? I apologize if I'm going too quick on that, but I can break it down any further if you need me to before we transition to capacity. Okay. So knowing that piece, knowing condition is important when we're trying to identify where we start at in our plant. But we got to focus on capacity too, right? The facility has to be equipped to treat the flows that come from the facility. So when we say capacity of a wastewater treatment plant or the capacity of a process, we've got to engineer. There's got to be two different meanings to the same word. When we say capacity, we mean treatment capacity, which means how much flow can I push through this process and still meet the performance I'm trying to get out of it, right? How much can I stress it and it still achieve the goals, the permit limits, or just the removal performance that this facility is designed for? A lot of times, most times, that's based on experience, that's based on expertise. That's subjective though. I'm trying to take this piece out of the evaluation. So for what we did when we were defining capacity for the wastewater treatment plant, we relied on industry accepted guidelines. 10 state standards, manuals of practice, a lot of just general, everyone accepts this as a good, reliable criteria. MDEQ kind of has the same language when engineers design upgrades. They basically say, use industry accepted criteria such as manuals of practice, such as 10 state standards. If you deviate from that, we'll consider it. You just have to submit that in writing and let us take it into evaluation. But for today, when we were assessing condition, we wanted to take that subjectivity out, and we relied on those two standards to define capacity as we go through this. It's also important to know that the permit limits will also have an impact. Since 1980, the discharge permit at the plant has gotten tighter. It's gotten a little bit tougher to meet. So what it was designed to treat for in 1980 isn't necessarily the case because MDEQ has tightened those limits, and it's not the same capacity for eternity if our permit limits change. Doesn't mean it does go down, but we have to look at it through the lens of what was it designed to treat, but what does it have to treat? That's really the most important question today. So when we establish treatment capacity, we're looking at what does it have to do to meet that permit compliance today.
What does downrated mean? What is that going to mean? You can't treat as much, or you aren't allowed to treat as? What does that mean?
Well, not necessarily allowed. It just means from a perspective of how much flow can I push through it and to achieve that goal that we want. If I add more factors to that goal, I may not be able to push as much flow through it to hit that. It doesn't mean that it gets permitted any differently necessarily.
Okay, that answers
it just may mean, Thomas, we may need to look at additional equipment that goes in there. We may have to adjust how we operate it a little bit to hopefully keep that same benchmark. That's the ideal goal. And I don't want to say like this happens all the time. A lot of instances, for instance here, the permit in 1980, while it was a little bit less strict, it's not going to the far extreme. A lot of the same limits that Thomas has to treat for today, DOD, TSS, ammonia, a lot of those same numbers have gotten marginally lower, but it's not out of the realm of the capabilities of what it was designed for before. Just may not have as much conservatism, a safety factor in there to hit that target.
Okay, so when you say downrated, that's not like an MDEQ rating.
No,
that's okay.
No,
Gotcha.
it's just how we're less comfortable pushing the same amount of flow through.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Hydraulic capacity is totally different. Basically, this is how much flow can I push through the plant, push from process to process, and not spill out of the tanks and run on the ground. I don't care if I hit a performance goal. I don't care if I hit a permit limit. I just care that it doesn't spill out on the ground and that be an issue, right? So that is our hydraulic capacity. And that's dictated just by the physical characteristics of a facility. So we look at pump capacity, we look at pipe size, and what's that pipe network look like as it goes from tank to tank. We look at gates, valve position, weirs, all of the things that control the water level through the plant. We have to understand that because that ultimately contributes to the hydraulic capacity. And we always start at the end of the plant and work upstream. So we don't actually start at the last process. We look at our discharge point. So where Hollis Creek and the wastewater plant meet, we want to know what that water level is there and work our way back. And why that's important is, generally speaking, that stream during dry weather, middle of the summer, is going to be low, right? That's good to know, but what's better to know is during that 100-year flood event, when that stream gets high, can I still push the flow through my facility, or am I going to be in trouble? From a regulatory perspective and really industry accepted guidelines, a 100-year flood event is typically the target when we're talking about risk. We may want to know what happens at 500 years, but 100 years is always available through FEMA. The flood insurance rate maps is where we go for that information. And over time, that may change, right? If there's downstream development that have restricted that river or that water body, it's just changed. FEMA updates those maps, maybe every place is different, it's every few years. And so over time, if there was no development 40 years ago, but all of a sudden that community is built around there, there's a chance that that receiving body has changed, and we have to take that into account when we look at our facility. So sometimes when we talk about capacity and trying to avoid just all the terms that may come up, we just have to be cognizant of the fact, and what I want the takeaway to be today is our flow conditions at the plant are continuously changing. There's no, hey, it's a 5 MGD plant, so we see 5 MGD all the time. That would be great. Thomas would absolutely love it. He would jump up and down if he just saw one steady number day in and day out. But unfortunately, that's not the case. So if we think about it over the course of the day, our flow is just continuously changing. And generally speaking, 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. when everybody wakes up, we may be a little bit higher. Middle of the night, say from every place is different, but maybe 11 a.m. to 4 a.m., 11 p.m. to 4 a.m., everybody's asleep. No one's taking a shower. No one's doing the dishes. College town, maybe those numbers are a little bit different, but for sake of this conversation. But then everybody wakes up, or it's the middle of the day, or maybe it's a football game and halftime happens. We're going to see a peak event. And that's really what we're interested in, is what's that instantaneous peak flow during the day that I have to account for. Now, a lot of times when we're talking, we don't throw out, hey, your peak daily flow is this, or your min flow is this. We generally talk about on an average day basis. So if I take a 24-hour average of the lows and the highs, I'm going to come up with a number. And so I want everyone to just kind of understand is, I want to say the plant averaged 4.8 MGD per day, but just think of it, during that day, it was higher than 4.8 for a while, and it was lower than 4.8 for a while. So they're continuously changing. It's also true over the course of the year, right? The spring showers come, or the dead of the summer when it's extremely dry. And we like to plot that because it tells us a few different things. So each of these numbers represent that 24-hour average that I've talked about before. And our time scale on the bottom is years. So this is basically, each day I'm dropping a dot from my average daily flow. And right now it looks like a bunch of dots on a white screen. It doesn't really tell you much, other than over the course of the year, how high did my flow get? That's a very extremely important variable for us to know as designers, as operators, as users of the system. We can take an annual average flow. That's basically a sum of all of the daily flows and averaging that out. That's going to tell us a 365-day or an annual average. And we'll talk about annual averages here in some following slides, so please keep that in the back of your mind. One of the things we also do, and this one maybe not as intuitive, is we want to take a rolling 30-day average of each of those dots. And the reason that we do that is most of our permits are written on a monthly average. So it's not that Thomas has to treat for this number on a daily average. What MDEQ is concerned about is during that month, that 30-day period, what was your average? Because that's what we want to know ultimately went to the stream or went to the creek. And so we'll plot a rolling 30-day average, and generally we'll see kind of a low, but we'll also see a high. And that high is what we call the maximum month. And when we design our biological treatment systems or a lot of the processes at the plant, that maximum month number is extremely important, because what that number tells me is there is 1 month out of the year, let's touch screen in it, 1 month out of the year that this facility is going to see that flow over 30 days, and my process better be able to treat it. If I design for that annual average down here, there's a gap, right? That's may put me at risk of violating. Doesn't necessarily mean that you will, but if you design for here, you're short-sighting yourself and you may be important. So we have to look at it through that lens as well. So if we look at the wastewater treatment plant, if we tie all of that together, this is flow data since 2022. Each of those dots that we talked about represent a 24-hour average. This line in the middle is our annual average. So you can see over the past 2 years, the plant's generally been at about 4.8 MGD. Over that period, we had a 30-day peak of about 7.9 MGD, so you can see kind of the scale magnitude of that. If I designed for 4.86, I would be in a lot of trouble if I saw 7.9. But we also saw a peak over that period of 10.6 MGD. And so hopefully what the takeaway is we're going to talk numbers, we're going to talk capacity, but we try to take all of this into account. And I want to tell you one number, but just know behind the scenes there's a lot that went into that number to make sure it was a safe planning criteria that we're comfortable operating the facility to ultimately hit our permit requirements. I mentioned the criteria before, just to kind of reiterate that. The evaluation criteria were established using industry accepted standards. This is generally what they look like: 10 state standards. WEF is Water Environment Federation Manual of Practice of Design, and then Metcalfe and Eddy. Each of these have, they all generally agree. It's not like this one says one number, this one's totally different. There's only so much you can say about how to design a wastewater treatment plant. But what's important is, as these are updated, for instance, the most recent edition of this was 2014. Metcalfe and Eddy is on its 5th edition, which I think came out in 2020, 2021. So we do want to understand, the more that we learn about the industry, the more we learn about processes and how much we can push. I want to be sure that I'm evaluating it, from the right perspective and giving you the most useful, applicable data that I can. So, what do the numbers look like at the plant? Well, first of all, each process is different. As nice as it would be for all of the numbers to fall in a straight line, that's not necessarily the case. But with this criteria in mind, and looking at the loadings that the plant has seen, so how much BOD, how much ammonia, how much TSS, what comes down the pipe that Thomas has to treat for, the oxidation ditches are the capacity limiting process. And that's the ditches as they stand today. If you drove down to the plant, you saw the temporary aerators in service. Generally, we would feel comfortable that facility, that process could treat 4.2 MGD. And as you can imagine, your process limiting number is the capacity of the plant. We may be able to push more through headworks and more through grit removal, but this is going to be our bottleneck. This is going to be our pinch point. So 4.2 MGD is generally what we kind of concluded is the capacity of those oxidation ditches right now. That was on the treatment side of things. If we look from a hydraulic perspective, so let's take performance out the window. We don't care about performance, but we do want to check, just because a number may be high that it can treat for, if I can't physically push the water through, I don't need to have that, right? So we have to look through it at both. So by and large, each of the processes at the plant are more than adequate, more than capable of handling the flow that comes to it. There's not necessarily a concern there, which isn't surprising. Most of the time, these are always higher numbers than the treatment capabilities. We want it to be. Honestly, that's how we design it to be that way. But sometimes things change. There may be some shortcomings at some facilities, or maybe some replacements that happened over time that may drive some of these numbers down. But for takeaway today, there were really only 2 processes that we were limited to by the hydraulics. And so this is combining both of those numbers. You can see in purple is our hydraulic constraint. So hydraulically, we're limited at these processes. The rest of these are all based on treatment capacity, so our ability to meet our performance goals. Out of that, doesn't change the conclusion that the oxidation ditches still continue to be the limiting process at the plant at 4.2 MGD. So when I combine the past data that I showed you for the past 2 years, you had a peak flow of 10.6 MGD that you had to treat for, that the plant saw. On an average day basis, you saw 4.86 MGD. That's what you had to treat for on an average day basis. And you can see that there's quite a few gaps. And that's ultimately what we're trying to figure out here. That doesn't mean that the plant busted permit particularly on that day or over that period. That might have happened in the middle of the summer where treatment's just a little bit easier than it may be in the winter. But the gaps are risk. The gaps are concerning because there's the potential that if that facility saw that flow, under the circumstances that it would assess that it could bust permit. And we do kind of things line up if we look at past data that support those conclusions. So taking all of that information together, we got results of the condition, right? We know what's good, we know what's bad, we know what's at risk of failure and what that failure may mean. We also know the capacity. We know where our gaps are. We know what's equipped to treat at the plant. We also know what's not. We got to marry those together, and what the goal, and working with Edward and Mary and Thomas, the goal is how do we start tackling the improvements that are necessary at the plant. So trying to do all of that in a strategic way, the easy thing to do is to lump all of it together and say you need to do a project for this. Well, that's not financially reasonable, and I understand that. So trying to chip away at that, and ultimately what we came up with is, we're calling them project packages. There were 6 project packages that the report is going to recommend to address the issues of the plant. And we're going to walk through what each of those are, and more importantly, what each of those will do as it relates to the condition results and to the capacity. So package A, Edward mentioned at the beginning, is currently under design. It's going to address the oxidation ditches, which is a capacity issue, but it's also going to address the critical condition of the site electrical and the disinfection. In other words, what I showed you before, we're going to tackle these projects that are critical risk in the red first. And that's what we are designing for today, and that's what we're going to address, so that coming out of package A, you can see that I'm sitting pretty good. I don't have anything in the red now. That's the goal and the intent of that project. So I'm addressing the condition here, but I'm also improving my capacity. So if you'll recall, I showed you this graph before that showed that the ditches were at a capacity of 4.2 MGD. There was a gap there because I've seen flows higher than that over the past couple of years. With these improvements, we're going to be able to feel comfortable that those oxidation ditches can treat up to 5.8 MGD. So now I've got overlap with what my plant has seen over the past few years, and I've got capacity, more importantly, to treat what's coming in. So that's the first step. It doesn't address some of these other gaps, and we'll talk about that in subsequent projects, but in terms of immediate need, the most critical processes we're tackling first, as well as, while there is a gap here, I may could live with it not achieving its performance goal. Right? If the headworks isn't operating under ideal circumstances, but it's still pushing the flow downstream, I can live with that. This is permit compliance right here is ultimately what that shapes back to. And so that's very, very, very important when we're prioritizing how we address capacity. The estimated OPCC for package A, you can see each of the various elements that are in that, puts that project at just under $9.5 million. Package B.
Well, let's go back to package A.
Okay, yes ma'am.
Timeline on package A?
So we are in design right now. That project has to be bid and awarded in early August in order for us to meet the funding obligations through ARPA and the funding mechanism for that project.
Okay.
I'll go back to the previous slide.
Yes, sir.
All right, get this 5.8. We get to 5.8. Are we still, I mean, how much capacity we have with growth of MSU, City Star, and things like that? It looks like that just gets us to a new level where we can handle. I mean, go in a little more detail about why 5.8 versus trying to get, I mean, cost, of course, but not trying to get to 6 point, whatever that six,
Yes, a higher number.
I don't know, 6 or 7 or something like that. I mean, it's just a function of money. I mean,
It's not a function of money. A lot of it's just the characteristics of those basins themselves. So basically what we're going to be doing in this project is those failing aerators, you have 3 per oxidation ditch, so a total of 6. We're replacing those with newer units, the most efficient that we can get. They just have a certain capacity tied to it. And once we replace those and get those into service, that's how we're going to achieve that 5.8. It's trying to balance what's financially prudent in terms of improvements to the oxidation ditches themselves versus getting capacity online very, very quickly so that we don't have those issues.
the oxidation ditches, those are like big cement, big concrete lagoons, right? That's in a way, kind of like Beverly Hills builds a cement pond. That's
Yes, sir.
That's what,
Yes,
so
sir.
those are holding places where you do aeration to do.
Yeah, and
or they
what's-
found-
so what the rotors are doing, the aerators, what they are doing is they're transferring oxygen into the ditch itself. I mentioned before that it's a biological system. Just like us in this room, they need oxygen and they need food, just like all of us here. Well, these mechanical devices are what's transferring that oxygen from the atmosphere into that basin. And there's just a certain limit, there's a ceiling that a certain diameter disc at a certain depth can do. And that's just all that the manufacturer is comfortable and test data show that it can
The oxygenation of the bugs helps them to kill, to clean or
get.
just.
Keeps them going, keeps them happy.
That's what the process
Keeps
is.
them hungry. That's kind of the fuel for them doing their job. Yes, sir.
Alderman Beatty can also, I think the other question you're asking is, how does the oxidation ditches set us up for that 20-year study period, right?
Okay.
And I think what this does is it gets us in a better situation in the short term, short to medium term. But as you'll see in a later package, as that growth number continues to go up from the university, the city, the surrounding areas, there will be a need for additional oxidation in the future, an additional ditch, and that is one of the
A
later
third
packages.
one, no, George, what you're saying.
But that is probably 15 years down the road. But that was contemplated in the study as well.
That's what.
Package B. So the focus of Package B is our headworks facility. These facilities were more capacity constrained, but they do have some concerns on the condition. The influence screen is right here. The grit chamber is a yellow, but it's still kind of high on the likelihood of failure. Excuse me. Following these improvements, we're comfortably in the green, both with the screen and the grit chamber. So we're really addressing the condition of those processes as a part of this package. We're also greatly increasing the treatment capacity. You can see the gaps here in the current flow. Following these improvements, and here's where that future flow line comes into play. We're not going to design something for today, and we absolutely want to try to tackle what's coming down the road. And you can see just with these improvements, and we're not talking about a facility that's double the size of what it has to be for today. It just may be, hey, instead of this channel being 4 feet, let's make it 6 feet wide. Just simple things like that that's good to know. We can greatly increase our treatment capacity, and just by doing that, we would be able to do that. So certainly slowly filling in the gaps, right, as we go. Here you can also see it as kind of, as Edward was alluding to, these numbers right here, and I don't have a graph to show this, but what this number represents is the 2044 flow conditions that we expect to see at the plant. And that was taken based on population growth data for the city, as well as the university provided a 20-year projection of what we expect, or they expect their enrollment to be. So sometimes flow projections are, when you're looking into a crystal ball and how clear is that crystal ball, it's about as clear as we could now, but that's absolutely something, and it's a kind of a final recommendation as we go forward, is let's track that growth and see how that aligns to this data. This document is intended to be a living and breathing thing, and so we need to make sure that the assumptions that were put into that live out, and we're not just totally missing something. Package B, a little over $6 million. Again, new headworks facility, addresses condition, it addresses capacity. It provides redundancy, which contributes to ultimately treatment reliability. It's a very important piece of our treatment puzzle.
But I'll stop you for a second. So just for the board's edification, at the last board meeting, we applied for our wastewater STAG grant. And the applications are due today. This will be the project that is submitted for that particular grant. Is this package?
Package B, Headworks.
Yeah.
Timeline on package A, any kind, what, or time,
So
what?
we expect, again, to bid by the end of the summer. We expect to be under construction for a majority of next year. There's a long lead time. It's probably 30 to 40 weeks just from the day that you order the equipment before it gets on site. And so we expect by the end of next year that equipment to be installed and slowly coming out. I say slowly, we're going to be pushing. We're not just standing by on the sidelines and get together. We're fast tracking design to get it through. We're going to be pushing the contractor to get it through as quick as we can as well. But generally speaking, we expect it to come online towards the end of 2025.
Mr. Kemp, is Mississippi State aware, I'm sure that y'all are in consultation with them on what their prorated share of the capital cost will be on this?
Well, they were part of our initial kickoff. We kept them abreast of the project. They've been provided a draft of the report as well, understanding that they are a partner in this plan together. So yes, they are aware that we're going through this exercise and that there will be some recommendations for improvements.
What is their contractual obligation, capital cost of this? Capped at 25%.
They pay their pro rata share for all operation and capital expenses at the plant. And it's based on the amount of flow that each entity provides to the plant on an annual basis.
Do we determine their prorated share on a rolling average basis, or is it in the contract set that it was supposed to be a certain amount they would pay for capital projects, or what do you?
Well,
How would they? What would be the percentage of their cost share in this? If there's a, if this is a grant and we have a 20% or a 30% cost share, whatever, or we had to bear all of what's there?
so we look at a calendar year snapshot when we calculate flows. And so we have flow monitoring devices at the inflow pump station. That's all the flows that are coming into the plant. And then there's subsequent flow measuring devices around the campus that they are actually calculating the amount that they're sending to us, and then we compare that with that total flow. And so what you do is over time is you calculate what that percentage is. And I think that last year's percentage was in the, I can't exactly remember, it's in the 25 to 30% range if I'm not mistaken, but I can get you that number. And they pay that percentage based on flow of all our operation maintenance and capital.
And capitalize it, but they do it as they use it. It's not like when the cost comes to you for the $10 million for the project, we incur that and we just recoup that from them as they.
We invoice them essentially.
And we recoup that along with whatever the normal operational cost is running through that.
That's right.
As a percent
We're
of the revenue.
responsible for basically completing the project, and then we reconcile it at the end of the year. And that's what we did on this most recent capital improvement with the solar drying houses and the aeration, is that was included in the latest invoice.
Thank you.
And I think kind of what Alderman Beatty is, or what I'm hearing him asking is, when we do that MSU calculation and we're talking about capital improvements, does that invoice reflect the cost in that 1 year, or is it a depreciated, an amount that flows through like a depreciation amount? So will they pay a large chunk up front, or will it be prorated over time?
The way that we have it set up right now is it's based on the actual amount expended.
Okay,
So it would
okay.
be
Real time,
cost.
okay.
Now, understanding too, that there is some flow that flows through MSU to their large
Right, it
stations.
goes-
So they also will invoice us for the
Right.
amount of share that they pump for us to our plant. So
Right.
it's a somewhat complicated formula, but that was clarified, I believe, last year, we clarified the formula because we added new flow monitoring devices, and then we also changed the snapshot period to a calendar year, because MSU's fiscal year was June 30th, our fiscal year on the water wastewater was September 30th, so just from a consistency, we moved it to a calendar year. So,
Have they looked at their pump that's pumping? Do we know what the life of it is?
they actually just did a major upgrade on, it's the Catawba station, it's right there near the vet school, and that was 3 years ago.
So it's fairly new.
And we paid our for
Right.
for that, those improvements.
What's that big pipe out on 182, a huge pipe they put in? Was that water sewer? Out there on
I
the side,
believe that's.
north side ball
I
field.
believe that's sewer. They're.
Well, I've gotten way off in the weeds. I'm sorry, thank you.
Give him a chance to rest his voice.
I do, just last thing, I do think the takeaway is that we have to stay in pretty close communication with MSU. We do that. Saunders Ramsey is in charge of that side.
We invited them to come to the work session, by
None
the
of
way.
this
so-
is a surprise, and obviously it impacts them, and what they do impacts us, so we stay in close communication.
Package C, if you'll notice, it may not stood out just yet, you'll notice that we're still not addressing the gap here with our secondary clarifiers, but also there's still a pretty big gap down the road as it relates to really our facilities on the back end. And certainly, one strategy would be to kind of methodically address our disinfection and make upgrades. It could be to address our post-aeration and make upgrades as needed. Another way to approach it, and what we chose to do here working with staff, is include a new flow equalization basin. So basically, this is just a wide spot in the line that flow could be routed to during a peak flow event, so that our peak number, in this case, it's a little over 20 MGD, we can limit that. So following those improvements, we would be able to limit our peak to those processes to just a little bit over 10 MGD. And what that means for you is, now those processes that are in place now but lack that capacity for the future are well within that line, which is a good thing. Now, the headworks is still a very important piece. We want all of our flow to go through the headworks before it goes to our equalization basin. If we don't, that creates trash, that creates debris that staff have to get out of there with a fire hose or whatever the needs may be. So we still want to process it prior to that basin, but once it goes in that basin, it's a big holding pond. I think in this case about 3 million gallons. Don't quote me on that. It's a very significant capacity, but it does provide us a lot of flexibility, not just for that flow condition. It certainly helps out with current conditions as well. That package is 6.86 MGD for that particular project. Package D, just a couple more as we go through this. We do still need to address some of our secondary treatment processes. If you'll notice, we still have quite a few here hovering in the orange. Because we don't necessarily know timeline when that project would be, there's a likelihood that some of these may be in the red at that time if they're continuing operation. So really the point of Package C is to start addressing some of those elements here, so that following Package C, for the most part, we're able to get most of our assets in the green or into the yellow, which is basically restoring that condition and getting them into a good, reliable, operable state. The other big thing that this package includes is our secondary clarifiers, which are a very, very important process at the plant. You'll notice that even with that peak flow basin, we still have a gap that we're not filling. That's of concern. It's something that we do want to fill. We don't want to live with that. And so with this project, making the improvements, we'll be able to far exceed that. And that shows 19. Again, one of the things that we will be able to do as time goes on, as we continue to see the impact of, for instance, the improvements to the oxidation dishes, the investment that Starkville continues to make in their collection system to reduce I&I, those type of things, we'll be able to really make the right decision. If that's a third clarifier, maybe it doesn't have to be that big. Maybe we can provide the right size at that moment in time. But for right now, just kind of applying another unit, just for sake of discussion today, that would put you at 19. And that's the bulk of the cost in this package. Again, I mentioned a lot of this is pump replacement. There is a small structure to help split the flow better, to get a little bit better performance out of our clarifiers. But this package is a little over $7 million. And again, a big piece of that is the clarifiers. It's rehabbing really the existing ones now and getting them into a good operable state so that they can continue to serve their function at the plant going forward. Package E, we still have a couple of pumps left that are in the orange. Again, the goal of this is to reduce our risk as best as we can. This project is tackling the pump building that we still have and the influent pump station. Not necessarily for the flows that we have today. Y'all have a project right now that's rehabilitating the pump station. This is to address that future capacity line that we talked about before. I don't have the slide that shows that influent pump station as a part of that, but we would be effectively, after this project, pulling all of our assets either into the yellow, while a failure of the chlorine contact chamber would be a major thing. The likelihood of that is extremely rare. I think we're comfortable all living with that. But in terms of condition, following package E at the plan of the assets, of the processes, this really puts us in a good position to rely on that plant going forward and let it continue to support the growth and all the needs of Starkville that y'all have. That OPCC for that package is right now just a little under $4 million. You can see where those cost differences are. The final package, Promise Package F, this is simply constructing that third oxidation ditch that Edward was talking about before. This is when we would fill that gap with just a third unit. That would be the focus of this. And you can see following Package F, we're comfortably above our future conditions. The plan is in place. It's ready for our projected 2044 flows, as well as growth that the system will continue to see. And this is kind of the last piece of that puzzle that we put together to come up with the final conclusions. The oxidation ditch is not a small structure. It's not a small asset. It's not a small investment. It comes with the largest price tag that we've seen out of all these packages. But as Edward alluded to, we're talking several years down the line as that need kind of propagates.
Before you do that,
Yes, ma'am.
take a break. You got a question?
A quick question. When y'all are estimating your cost for these various packages, are you inflating that, or is
Those
this,
are today's
those are
dollars.
real,
Those are
okay.
today's dollars, just because the question of when they would occur is just.
So it could easily be a $15 million project and.
Unless we had about $35 million on hand right now.
15 years.
We'd all run that from.
Well, I mean, again, it's a crazy world. The past 5 years ago, for anything
Yeah.
infrastructure related, and it really makes it a challenge.
And even if we did have $35 million lying around, to be able to get all this done in 2 to 3 years we've learned is just impossible, so.
Yeah. Chipping away at this makes perfect sense. And that's the financially prudent decision, and it's just the challenge then is where do you start, right? And that was the goal of this effort, is to answer that question, or at least make some recommendations on where you start. And that way you're applying your money at the area that needs it the most, right?
Yeah.
Great presentation.
Okay, so a 5-minute break for some pizza, and then we'll get conclusions. How about that? That work?
Yeah, that was that oxidation ditch.
All those notes.
I don't know what it comes.
like stuff in your mouth with food as I tell you the takeaways.
Keeps us from yelling at you.
That's right. One thing that I did want to communicate, because it was the perfect opportunity to, and no, I'm not telling you anything that you don't already know, but the staff that y'all have at the wastewater treatment plant are top notch. While that plant is 45 years old and there are capacity challenges, they're doing everything in their power to keep it in the lane. Right? And I think it's showing up in past data. A lot of times where you see, well, you said our capacity is 4.2, but we've had averages of 4.6. Why haven't we violated? It's because of their hard work. And so they've been active, they've participated, they've been probably more invested than all of us in terms of getting the right things in. So I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that today. That's a testament to Thomas and his staff. Which is our first takeaway. Hopefully what I've showed y'all today it helps to condense this down into a few bullet points. Many of the critical assets at the facility are original 1979. It was a good investment in 1979 because you got your money's worth over this time. They've operated well, but they're operating beyond what is considered a useful life. And that doesn't mean tomorrow that they finally hit that retirement age and they're ready to hang it up, but it could, right? And so the point of that is understand, with age comes the need for preparation and to have those spare parts on hand or have an understanding, hey, if this pump goes down, how quick can that manufacturer get me that replacement one? We mentioned lead times on pieces right now. Motors and electrical gear just would blow your mind. We're talking years potentially in some cases where we're waiting on other projects for large electrical gear. It's shocking every time you ask. But knowing that, making preparation so it doesn't catch you off guard is really the main point there. With the anticipated growth, the wastewater treatment plant will continue to be challenged to meet treatment goals and permit requirements. And I use the term challenge, doesn't mean that it won't. That it comes with hard work, and it's hopefully that big flow events at the middle of the summer where it's hot and it's not as big of a deal, but it's going to be a challenge to maintain compliance as you will. There's just no other way to say that. We identified the 6 project packages to allow Starkville to strategically address the condition and capacity of the wastewater treatment plant. Trying to put those together in a way that was, I said, financially prudent, financially reasonable was important. So hopefully that gives you a methodical way to slowly start chipping away, start climbing that mountain, so to speak, of addressing condition and addressing capacity. We're cognizant of the fact that the city is growing, and y'all have people coming to you probably daily that want to connect to the system, and as it relates to economics and the community, you don't want to tell anybody this. So we're cognizant of that, and we've had a lot of conversations about how can we still accommodate that, even though that there is a gap in that treatment capacity. And what we came up with, kind of a reasonable target for right now, what we would recommend is to limit growth to around 100,000 gallons per day, per year going forward. And let's see how the plant responds. So basically, kind of rule of thumb, 120 gallons per person per day is kind of a good rule of thumb on what an average user contributes to our wastewater treatment plant. So we're talking, that's about 1,000 people per year is kind of what that number translates back to. That's not based on 2 pages of calculations. That's just kind of a gut feel based on what we see the plant doing right now. That changes, maybe that I&I continues to pay dividends and those numbers kind of start driving down. Well, that creates more here. Tom's is going to continue to keep a close tabs on the loadings and everything that comes to the plant so that maybe he's operating a little bit more efficiently. Once those aerators come online, the floodgates change, right? That constraint goes away because we address that aerator and that capacity is over 5 MGD, which is a gap compared to where your historical flows have been. So just in conversations, this was a target for right now, but just know that that's a target that we need to update and define, as we go through this time period over the next couple of years. And the final point that really ties into that, the term living and breathing plan, this is not intended to be something that goes on the shelf and you blow the dust off every 10 or 15 years. The wastewater plant is continuously changing because the flows are continuously changing, And so a lot of the conclusions that we made, they're based on a snapshot of time, right? That's a finite period, and because we have to draw boundaries. None of us are fortune tellers and can understand what's going to happen next year. So taking that into account and understanding how that impacts these conclusions and these recommendations are important, because it could be a positive impact, it could be a negative impact, but you need to know that, right? So that you're making the right plans, and you're ultimately putting that piece of the puzzle in place that the plant needs and the community needs, right? The plant is a key piece of infrastructure. Without our infrastructure, that growth just doesn't exist, or it may exist, but it's going to lead to problems if you don't have the infrastructure to support that. So that was it. Those were the 6 takeaways, but certainly questions, discussion, please.
Okay, so the timeline on that, 2020, you think early 2026, or is that being extremely conservative? Because you had talked about delivery of.
I would hope late next year. I really do hope late next year we're able to get the equipment installed and to get those processes up and going. We just don't know what that lead time is going to be right now on the equipment. Because, and this is what equipment manufacturers will do, the people that will sell you the equipment are not the people that actually engineer it. And so the salesman will tell you whatever number you want. When they get the PO, it goes to a different person. He's the one that actually tells you, he or she, that comes up with, how long is the fab time? How quick can I procure these parts? And that's when they start putting all those estimates together. I would expect that equipment is probably a 30 to 40 week lead time, potentially, from the day that they get the purchase order. And so if, let's say that's September, that puts that equipment potentially being on site at the end of the summer. And we'll give the contractor a few months to install that. Ideally, we want it in the summer because that's when our flows are the lowest, because we're going to have to take some of the processes offline to get some of this work done. We want to minimize the impact of the plant as best as we can, but when we install those aerators, one of those ditches is going to be down at a time. And so it's a lot of things to juggle there. Hopefully in the summer, we would be making progress on getting those online, and then if it's fall.
So summer of 2025 is what you're looking at.
That would be the hope, but again, I qualified that with a lot of things.
Yeah, no, I understand. And for purposes of me just saying this out loud, because I want to hear myself say it, but for the issues that we currently have with the wastewater treatment plant, we would have been online with a adequate or an effective oxidation process. Is that correct? Okay. So we were actually making the progress we thought we were making until there was the failure. And so that failure has cost us to go back. It's cost us years, and it's cost us funding.
That's correct. We would be tackling the package B right now.
Right, exactly. Okay. That's for the record, folks.
Y'all do work for Auburn, Alabama?
We don't. I know the people at Starkville, but we do not do work. We do work in Tuscaloosa.
How are those places just growing in leaps and bounds? Auburn grew the population of our city in 10 years. They went from 50 to 75,000 population. It's 25,000. That's the population of our city roughly in 10 years. They just have to, it has to be a constant thing if there's treatment facility coming in.
They are.
And Tuscaloosa, I guess, also.
Tuscaloosa it's to tell too much on that. Very similar story. They're at capacity at their plant. They're growing. Enrollment continues to go up. At Auburn, I went to Auburn, so I'm a little bit familiar with the area. Auburn's a little bit different because they're bringing a lot of industry in as well. It's kind of interesting to see. And I don't know, it's been a while since I've been there. I don't know if they've really incentivized a lot of the research and the faculty that are there that translates into actual industrial type facilities. But there's a lot of growth that's being led by that, which is just a little bit different than I think most places as it relates to the university. I think a lot of the students at Auburn also still stick around after they graduate because there's a lot of those type jobs versus you graduate and you move on. I think that's contributed a lot, at least in that area.
But there's...
Alderman Sistrunk had a question here. So, Alderman Sistrunk?
And I want to hear myself say this out loud.
Go ahead.
Because we have some ARPA funds in the Project A part of this. We're comfortably within the time frame that we need to have that committed and spent, right?
We will make that happen. We're aware of what that means for us on design. We kicked that project off about 3 weeks ago, honestly prior to y'all approving and executing, because that's just what we need to. After this today, I'm meeting with some of the electrical engineers that y'all worked with in the past, just to get on the same page with them. So
Well, and we can thank the county. Let's go ahead and give them props, because they have indicated they're going to give us $1 million of their ARPA money, which we will then turn into 2, which will also serve not just the city, which is in the county, but outside the city limits as well, because there's flow that comes from outside into this plant. So, okay. Alderman Beatty, you were something else?
It's most of the places like Tuscaloosa, they all have, everybody got mechanical now, nobody's doing lagoon ponds and that kind of thing. Are their systems similar, the way they do, the influent, all the different, where the stuff goes, and it's all pretty similar, I mean?
there are, the plant size is different. So Tuscaloosa is a 24 MDT facility. So same, it's not an oxidation ditch, it's an aeration basin, but it's still microbiology, it's still the workforce there. They deal with the solids a little bit differently. At Tuscaloosa, they have a process called anaerobic digestion, which is trying to produce methane gas that we can, in theory, turn into energy for the plant. Run maybe some generators, but that's their condition doesn't allow that to necessarily happen. So the same premise, we call it an activated sludge treatment. That's what y'all have. That's that secondary treatment we were talking about before, is activated sludge. They have the same thing. It's just in a different configuration.
All right. Anyone, anything else? You have done yeoman's work. Well done.
Thank y'all.
Well done.
Well, again, thank y'all for the opportunity.
Yeah, we'll give you a round. It was a class. It was a very good class. So, all right. Any further discussion? We have what we understand is a path forward, albeit 2 years behind where we'd like to be. We have a path forward, and we have potential funding for that path. I
You gonna
believe.
vote on something today?
No, there's nothing to vote on. No, don't be talking about voting in a work session.
I need Zach back over the corner.
So I think absent that, there is no action required of us. This was just truly an opportunity for us to see where we were and where we're going to have to go. And in the short term, we should be able to take care of the things that are going to allow us to grow. And we do have demands that are coming at us on the regular. And so we'll have to manage those. So, all right, thank you.
Just offer to.
Yes.
If you want to see some of these things come to life, I'm happy to take you out to the plant. Mr.
Watch the
Whatever.
microbes work.
Well,
I really do want to take y'all up on that.
Yeah, it is.
I'm curious.
It's a fascinating.
It is pretty fascinating.
Plant, and Mr. Thomas does an amazing job out there with this team.
Ex-Navy man.
It truly, wastewater is truly an art. It's not, there's a blend between science and art, and he does a masterful job.
He does. In fact, when you mention retirement, you don't even, Thomas, you're not going
So who are
anywhere.
you?
You're going to be with us for a while.
Who's the person you're training to learn all of your knowledge?
Everybody. We cross-train, so I got another Class 4 operator, I have a Class 3 operator, and I got a young man just coming on, because we aging out, and he's really curious and really a good learner. So I got a crew that if I'm out, anybody can step in. So we do have another Class 4 operator, which our permit require have in the Class 4 there 5 days a week. So we're in good shape for the near future.
Edward has been really good about making sure people are cross-trained and bringing people up. So that's been a really good thing that you've got going. So, all right, we will close this out. We can continue to talk or whatever, but we will go off of our Facebook Live, and folks can do what they need to do. So thank you very much. Appreciate it. All right. Thank you.
Well, I never knew sewage could be so fascinating.
It is interesting, isn't it?